So, joining us this week, we have coming all the way from Spain. I think this is the first person we've had from Spain, and that is a film critic, historian, lecturer, teacher. He's done tons of things through his career, his long career, and that is Adrian Martin. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for the invitation to be on this show. I've been listening to it recently. Terrific work that you both do.
Oh, thank you,
Oh,
man. Thank
thank
you.
you.
Anybody that we hear that says that they've listened to our stuff that works in the industry of what we like to talk about, we're just it's humbling. We
I just
appreciate
think,
any.
yeah, I
Yeah.
just think anybody
Well,
who takes the
anybody, of
time.
course, of course, anybody that listens to us is fantastic. But when because we take this seriously and we like to talk and we like to really shine a light on this passion we have for these physical media and the extras that go along with it. The fact that you guys are taking notice and starting to come to us or just be really happy to come on it's fantastic. So we appreciate you guys taking the time to hear us ramble with you guys. But Adrian, so in general, how's it going? How you feeling? How you doing?
I'm feeling pretty good, actually. There's always good films from the present or the past to discover. There's always things that I want to write about or speak about, to explore. So yeah, no, it's a good time.
Yeah, I get this impression that you're literally just living cinema all the time. You're looking at doing my research on you, you seem to just breathe it. You're just literally day to day just trying to find new things to write, trying to new things to watch. Yeah, it's kind of, and that's kind of my outlook on film. If I had the time, I wish I
Mm.
had more time, but just wanting to discover things. That was the key word of what you just said. I just love the discovery of
Mm.
film and cinema, and just hoping to always search for something I've never watched before. And
Mm.
that's, I'm assuming that's something that still drives you, is just that that search of something that can surprise you.
Absolutely. I mean, my daily regime is basically to watch a film a day or some episodes of a TV series every day, and I usually write something every day too. So they're the two main activities. I mean, I'm a freelance film critic. That's basically what I am, and so it's a mixture of writing things, of sometimes being invited to give talks, and doing audio commentaries on DVDs and Blu-rays. That's essentially what I make my my meager living out of. But it's the freelance life that I've chosen for myself because it's what I enjoy. It's what motivates me, and it's sort of what keeps me alive. Keeps my spirit alive. Is to constantly discover films, and I'm always on the search for for things I haven't seen, for genres I haven't yet explored, for parts of the world that I haven't really looked much at the production. Filmmakers I've never heard of before. It's important to it reminds me of the great days of the old VHS video shops where you would just walk in and you would just grab 10 boxes because they kind of looked interesting to you. The cover art would look interesting. This
Yeah.
is something that's a bit lost, I think, these days in the era of streaming, where you get these algorithmic recommendations. If you liked this romantic comedy, you will like that romantic comedy.
Mm.
Yeah.
But in the old VHS video shop days, it was like, oh, what's that? A horror movie? What's that? An art film? You would just wander, and
Yeah.
you would take a chance. You would take a chance on things you'd never heard of before. Nobody was saying to you, "I recommend that you watch that." Perhaps a friend might say that, and you would listen to them. But it wasn't an impersonal machine telling you you must watch that. You will like that. That is your taste. Because for me, the whole thing is, you know, each one of us should try to expand our taste a bit. I've often said taste is a prison, or it can be a prison. People who say, "Oh, I'm only into one kind of film," and or a very limited restriction of types of film. Whereas I think try to surprise yourself. You'll by chance you'll see something and you'll think, "Well, that's intriguing. I've never seen anything like that before. Now I want to see more of that." So that's really always been my guiding principle with viewing and also with writing.
Yeah, and with writing, I think I hear this from a lot of writers. It is important to write every day because it not
Mm,
only does it keep you, um, you know, keep you from getting rusty when it comes to just probably just normal things like grammar and things like it's just doing it the right way, but also just keeps you motivated, keeps you in a process of always thinking of different ways of how to get your points across, and
mm,
I think something that will probably be kind of a theme of this discussion is just how the ever changing way that people consume things is a way that can also can change the way you present your thoughts. The way that people consume media these days changes the way you need to explain yourself so that it's more accessible for the people that are watching. I think when it comes to extra features with we have the audio commentary, but you also have like visual essays that are kind of we've described them as almost like a condensed version of a commentary.
mm,
It takes snapshots of the movie, and you can write an essay form that kind of condenses down the thoughts of what a commentary might provide.
mm.
So, for some people, that's a better way to consume that kind of information because it's shorter. They don't have to watch the whole
Yeah.
movie. And that's, everybody's taste. If they
Yeah.
want to sit down and watch a whole movie and hear somebody talk over it, that's some people love that. Some people don't have the time
Yeah,
for that.
people's attention spans tend to get shorter and shorter as
Yeah.
time goes on. The generations kind of get shorter and shorter.
And that's the change that's happened. I
Yeah,
think
cultural
with something,
change,
you know,
societal change, and all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
You mentioned kind of the exploration or diversifying one's palette when it comes to different sections of cinema. Really, I guess we'll just do what our usual thing that we do, Stephen, is go back to the beginning. Where did that kind of
Mm.
that original like incarnation of your love of cinema start, and then obviously grow from there?
Mm. Well, I had a sort of an indirect path to loving movies, which was that as a kid, and I'm talking like 9, 10 years old, I was really into comics, and in fact Marvel comics. But this is the great era of Marvel comics in the
Yeah.
late '60s, and so I was like a comics fiend, and that got me onto science fiction novels. And around the age of 11, 12, I was an obsessive reader of science fiction, and like I'd read 3 to 5 novels a week, and I was also in a group of friends who would swap books, right? Trade books. So each week you'd read 3 books and you'd trade your 3 books, and you'd get 3 new ones, right? So I was into this whole scene of reading science fiction, and I was also hanging out at a shop in Melbourne, this is Australia, and a famous shop called Space Age Books, a place where years later I bought a lot of my film books because they were also into film in Space Age Books as well as science fiction. But the key thing that I discovered there, just through being an obsessive science fiction freak, was that I discovered the world of fanzines, printed fanzines at that time, of course. This is the 70s. And I started particularly reading a fanzine called SF Commentary, speculative fiction, science fiction commentary. And I really had no idea how highbrow this magazine was. I mean, the people who were writing for it, and it was just, as it were, an amateur production that some guy did in his living room, with his typewriter and his Roneo stencils and whatever. But the people who were writing for this were, for instance, Stanislav Lem, the author of Solaris, the book of Solaris. Lem, a very famous Australian novelist named George Turner, was writing for him. And they were writing about Philip K. Dick and J.G. Ballard and all these kinds of writers. And this was the key. They kept talking about films. It's like every SF commentator had to also have their list of recommended films. And the films were Solaris, Alphaville by Jean-Luc Godard, 2001: A Space Odyssey, of course, by Kubrick, La Jetée by Chris Marker. Now, as an obsessive sort of kid, I had to see these films, right?
Yeah.
I had no clue what they were talking about. La Jetée, what the hell is this? A film of still photographs all about time travel? What the hell is this film? Who's Chris Marker? And so, I would literally be bugging my dad. I'm a little kid and I'm bugging my dad. You got to take me to this screening at a university to see La Jetée, and Alfred.
I'm hoping that my daughter comes to me and says, "You want to see that art film?"
Please. Take
Please,
me to 2001.
please.
So, and also you've got to imagine, it's hard to imagine this now, but in the mid-70s in Australia, you could also see some of these films on commercial television. I mean, I saw Alphaville by Godard at midnight on a commercial TV station. I also saw films by Visconti, by Mitsuguchi, by Chabrol, by Truffaut, by Godard. All of these things were on TV, commercial TV, dubbed, of course, sometimes a bit censored. They were all on TV at midnight, often with a crazy host who was just sort of selling car tyres or something like that, in between 20-minute blocks of these masterpieces of art cinema. So as a kid, I had incredible access to a lot of things, and so the more I got into watching these kinds of films, suddenly I left science fiction behind. I've virtually almost never read a science fiction novel since my very early teens, and I went completely over to film. And I became obsessed with, reading coffee table books and, the kind of thing, the 50 films you must see, whatever there was at that time. And I would make lists of films. I got Andrew Sarris's famous book, The American Cinema, which is just full of lists of directors and films. And I would be writing my own lists and ticking films off, because also on television, on Australian television, in the afternoon this time, not at midnight, you could see an incredible range of Hollywood classics from the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s. I mean, this is where I saw films by Billy Wilder, Preston Sturges, Samuel Fuller, Nicholas Ray, John Ford, Howard Hawks, etc., etc. This was all on television. And so TV was just an incredible thing back then. It's no longer that now in Australia. I think it's pretty much the same case all over the world.
Yeah.
But that was another part of sort of what was available to me in those days. So I just became an obsessive cinephile, in the sense of just someone who loves films, who loves to discover films. But also I love to read about films. And this started very early for me. I'd just go to the local library. There would be 20 years of Sight and Sound magazine on the shelves. There would be Film Comment magazine in the local news agency. I mean, I could buy Sight and Sound and Film Comment just in a local, magazine and newspaper shop. This is another thing that's disappeared from our culture. It's not so easy to get that sort of intro into in-depth film criticism. So at the age of now 13, 14, I'm watching, Preston Sturges and Godard, and I'm reading Robin Wood's film criticism. I'm looking at all kinds of stuff. I'm reading books. Books were cheap then, it seems to me, in my memory. And one could buy books on Samuel Fuller. One could buy books about particularly American cinema. There was lots of stuff around to read. There was Victor Perkins's book, Film as Film. That was like a $1 paperback that I bought, when I was 13 years old. And so it was this mixture of reading, of exploring, of endless watching of everything. And because just another factor of the Melbourne Australian culture to mention is that in those days, even commercial film exhibitors and distributors used to show a lot of art movies, and not just in art cinemas, not just in special cinemas in special posh suburbs, right? I mean that, on the weekend in the centre of the city of Melbourne, you could go to an Ingmar Bergman festival. This is what I did when I was 13, 14 years old. I would go to these festivals where I would see 8 Ingmar Bergman films for some ridiculously low price, because you get one, discount ticket as a young kid. They used to have special prices for school kids to discover art movies. Once again, something that has really disappeared from our culture at this level, of the major companies, the major film distributors and exhibitors being this open. But that was because some of the people who started those companies were themselves originally cinephiles in their university days and so on and so forth. And they hadn't disowned all of that yet. They were still loving the art of cinema. They were still loving Fellini, Ingmar Bergman, Luis Buñuel. So these films, films like Buñuel's Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie had a commercial release in Melbourne. It was a kind of popular film. I remember my older brother, university student, basically telling me, "Oh, gee, you got to see this groovy film, Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie. You'll laugh your head off. It's surreal. It's crazy,
Yeah.
So that was a very normal part of people's culture then. These days, things get to be more divided up, and we associate Buñuel with, that's on the Criterion label and all this kind of stuff. But when these things are more open access across the board, it's a healthier situation, I think.
I think that I mean, we could argue that the excess is better than it's ever been.
That's true.
It's a matter, I think, of just I think people's I think film cultures, people's what they like to watch and the time that they have to watch things, that they've become a lot more limited for them. It's about people's time.
Yeah.
People don't have time to watch everything or explore like we would like them to. So they only pick the things that are kind of in their face, which is the things that get advertised the most, get the most money behind them.
Right.
Our mainstream cinema. What I would love to see one day would be, almost like a sectoring off, if there's any kind of sectoring off of when films get released. Maybe we release all the big movies in one sector of the year, and then no other, and then maybe like 2 to 3 months only put like independent films and art house movies out in the theaters, and let them have their own life by themselves.
In a way, that does happen now, with
kind
quote
of, but
unquote,
not really.
At least here, award season, which is typically the fall here. There's this race, this gamut at the end of the year for all of these lower independent films, these, I guess, high art, if you want to call it that, or the films that made the rounds at film festivals earlier in the year, all get released pretty much within a release window of September to December, most of them towards the later part of that time frame.
But they don't all make it to the theater,
and they don't. And if they do, limited runs. We're talking
limited. And there's tons of blockbusters that come out in them times.
Oh yeah,
that take the attention.
I didn't say they were getting released to a lot of people. I was just saying they were getting released.
But that's what I'm saying. That's what I want. I want to take all the big blockbusters away from a certain section and let just the independent films have the forefront. Because that's the problem, is that they're not getting the attention because they're shrouded in a big damn shadow of this big movie that's had millions of dollars put into it as a marketing machine.
I do not disagree with you, but it's like the state of the film industry as a whole doesn't allow for that.
It won't allow it. I'm saying this is a fantasy discussion.
Yeah, it is very much a fantasy world.
Yeah, but I do want to go back to something you said about Marvel. Being that you said you grew up as a comic fan, what's your interest in Marvel films? This big boom over the last 12 years, 15 years,
20 years, really.
I mean, really, yeah. But it really hit, 2008 when that Iron Man movie came out. Is really when the Marvel boom happened, and so where's your place with all that?
Yeah, it's look, I mean, I've got nothing per se against the Marvel movies or the Marvel universe in any media, but I myself sort of, because I had a period where I was a reviewer on a newspaper. I wasn't part of the newspaper staff. I was still a freelancer, but I worked for 11 years for the Melbourne newspaper, The Age. And what was good about that job was that, basically I saw everything. You know, anything I wanted to see that was in current release, I saw it and I wrote about it. And for me, that was very good discipline, a very good experience, in that I thought, I'm going to try to find something interesting to say about anything that I see, even if it's not my taste or not my kind of film. You know, it's what I was saying before, that the prison of taste, it was a really good way to get out of the prison of taste. I always know when people are not going to be very good in the job of film reviewers, because 2 weeks into it, they're saying, oh, I have to watch so much crap. You know, I have to watch a horror movie, I have to watch a teenage movie, I have to watch an action movie. And I said, that's what you're here for. You know,
Yeah.
you're here to watch all these films if you are a paid film reviewer, right? And you better do something with that. You better do something with that experience. You know, try to find something.
Look at it as an opportunity, you know,
Yeah.
to expand on your craft as a writer, even if you don't like something. You know, it's to write. I'm sure writing something that you don't like is more challenging than writing something you do like. I would assume, you know.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, I had this sort of personal rule, is that I had to have one idea in every review that I wrote. Preferably 3 ideas would be an ideal, but at least one idea. You know, not just to say this film's good or this film's bad or this film's crap, this film's masterpiece, but you know, to actually say something about the film or about the context of the film, the culture that the film's coming into, some trend in movies, something interesting that we can compare, we can connect a whole lot of films. This was my interest as a film reviewer. So to get back to the Marvel question, so now I was this newspaper film reviewer between 1995 and 2006. So there was a whole bunch of, you know, superhero blockbusters starting to emerge, you know, and that I was seeing and reviewing in that time. I can't personally say that they were the most exciting films for me. You know, I always thought there was something formulaic, which is not in itself a problem. A lot of films use formulas in very good, very inventive, interesting ways, but formulaic in a slightly empty way. I wasn't really getting, you could say, the mythological richness that I thought I experienced as a little kid when I was reading Silver Surfer and the Fantastic Four and all this kind of stuff. When I was watching these later film versions, I was thinking, there's some poetic mythological richness that is not there for me. You know, there's too much emphasis on narrative, purely on storytelling. Storytelling is a very important, great thing, of course, but that there has to be more than just storytelling in a film. And there has to be more than just an imaginary world. You know, we hear a lot these days about world building in video games, in Marvel universe and all the rest of it. But the world's got to be interesting, you know, that's made. It's got to have some poetic depth or suggestiveness, or, you know. So often I found that, you know, films that were kind of on the edge of the whole superhero fantasy thing, like a film like The Phantom from around 1995. Remember, I was quite excited by that because it wasn't a super seamless, perfect story. It had strange digressions. It's like it had little holes where the spectator's fantasy could enter.
Yeah.
And, you know, there were spaces where you could dream yourself. The film wasn't just giving you the dream. It wasn't just giving you the dream of another world or the dream of a superpower or whatever it is, you know. And you know, for instance, to take an example, I've always loved, you know, since the 80s, the work of Sam Raimi. I've thought, you know, very, very, very clever, very interesting, very skilled director. But as his work got more into the superhero thing, it became less for me. You know, some of the original zaniness, some of the original, you know, really clever, inventive stuff that was in, you know, the first Evil Dead movies and stuff like that, it's no longer there. A sense of outrageousness had disappeared a bit from some of Sam Raimi's later work. Every now and then he tries to get back to his roots, as it were. You know, he tries to return, and I applaud him for doing that. You know, for trying to bring back a lot of some of what originally inspired him.
Yeah, I think with Raimi, it's, you know, I'm sure there's executives that are pushing to change things and make things more you know, palatable for a wider audience. But I mean, the thing is people love Army of Darkness. I mean, that's a cult film, but it's become kind of past a cult film. So obviously what he does people like. So you have to just sometimes let filmmakers do their thing. But and then that became the debacle of Spider-Man 4 that never ended up happening. Well, I mean, Spider-Man 3 was a debacle in all of
Right.
its own.
But I think,
But
it's the industry is just so vastly complex that it could take an original, entity as like Sam Raimi and then kind of filter him down to the point
Yeah.
where he gets so frustrated that a production literally falls apart, literally falls apart. And
but also these stories are definitely not necessarily the same type of movies that he was telling before.
right.
Unless, I mean, did he do the movie Darkman? Was that him?
It-
Yeah, that's
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, in a way, you could look at that movie as a film that was a precursor to what he would eventually do with superhero films.
Right.
Like in a
But
way.
I would even argue that directors, filmmakers, can change their, you know,
Oh, of course.
can change their abilities
They
to direct
change.
different films.
They change
You know
over
what I
time.
mean?
Yeah.
Not every director's kind of, well, some stay in the specific lane and just kind of ride that wave throughout their careers, and some deviate. Some, some success, some not so success, and some are initially not successes. Then later on, you end up realizing, hey, that film was actually much better than we thought. Which I guess kind of wedges us into the whole film criticism thing. And just when did that kind of start for you? Was that part of your early writings?
It was, in the sense that when I was, already 13, 14 years old, just for myself, I was filling books and books. I think I still have them, notebooks, full of myself doing reviews. And some of these are very funny for me to read now because it's pure mimicry. I'm mimicking what I'm reading in Sight and Sound magazine, or I'm mimicking Andrew Sarris or Raymond Dernyat or whoever it was I was reading at that moment. I'm sort of speaking in their voice, imagining what they would say about the latest film the Robert Altman film that I'd just seen or something. But that was one way to begin writing. I think writing often begins by mimicry. You start to find your own voice, you copy other voices, and then slowly you arrive at your own voice. And that's exactly what I did. So I was writing very intensely, I must say, from the age of 13, 14. And then when I was 19, I started to appear in actual magazines, there was a famous Australian magazine, Cinema Papers, and 1979 is the first time that I appeared in print there. And from that point on, I've written very, very steadily, prolifically, I think we can say, in all sorts of different ways too, because I believe to be a writer, you should try all the different forms, Writing for newspapers, I did reviews that were, 50 words long, but I've also done, 20,000 word chapters for books. I've done very long studies of one film. I've done short reviews. I've written out talks that I give. I've tried to write in all sorts of different ways, different forms, different modes, because it's important to diversify your address. Like, you always think about who you're talking to and who you're trying to reach, and I've always tried to reach a wide audience, but in a way that's accessible, that gives them access to ideas that perhaps they haven't encountered elsewhere so far in their life. It's funny. I was listening the other day to the excellent interview you did with Alexandra, Helen Nicholas, and she said she left the university because she didn't want to talk to 60-year-old professors. She wanted to talk to 16-year-olds, budding film cinephiles. Well, I can go one better because I am a 63-year-old professor who talks to 16-year-olds.
Right.
I also want to reach 16-year-olds because I think of myself at that age, and how some things were easy for me to get access to. There were these cheap books about film. There were things on television, but there were things that were not of access to me. I couldn't just walk into a university and start listening to someone talking about film, in some higher level, more theoretical level. That wasn't accessible to me then. But if me, on an audio commentary, if I can sort of be the bridge between these different worlds, of the film fan and the professor, I'm happy to do that. It's all a question about giving the bridges, providing the bridges, and giving people some point of entry into thinking about films and exploring films further.
I think in a way, I think for the, I guess, more, um, not, I wouldn't even say older film fans, but people who have been film fans, whether you've been it your whole life or you've been it several years, whatever the case may be. I think you almost have not a duty, not like a calling, but I feel like you're almost inclined to do that naturally
Mm,
because you just like movies and you like cinema so much that you want to share it,
mm,
specifically share it with people that maybe younger than you or people that are not in the know like you. And then you maybe, because you always get people coming to you for recommendations and people coming to you for whatever the case may be, and you kind of have to train your mind into delivering the information to them
mm.
where it sounds interesting, because if it
Well, not
doesn't, yeah,
not even just interesting, but that you're not talking you're not, and I think this is kind of where we when we go back to the conversation we had with Alexandra, we don't want to be teaching the future just about what we think. Like, if I'm a teacher, I'm not teaching them what I think is the best things that they should be watching. We got to
Mm,
let them there needs to be some flexibility there. We should definitely be teaching them about the plot, the points, the things that were very important parts in history, but we also need to leave a little open for them to discover things on their own, and
mm.
point them in a direction, but then let them kind of have their own kind of like free range, because I
Yeah,
think that
I would even,
that when we talk about 60s something year olds and it being
right.
some of them can be very stuffy, some of them can
Well,
have
yeah, I
their
mean, not
minds made
every
up and not want to explore things that they've maybe never explored before and change their opinions.
I'd say
But yeah,
having been in like formal education for a long time, you run into different types of
yeah,
professors, teachers, academics, and whatnot, and not everyone approaches material the same way or delivers it to people the same way. I've had professors who literally read their notes from a yellow, like, uh, pad and paper, basically just notes that they've been using for years, and you can tell because the pages are all wrinkled and they're just flipping them over. And then I've had very interactive professors who were able to deliver the information in interesting ways, but also make it interactive on our level as students. And I guess, Adrian, since you're here and you have done teaching, has there been a certain, and you've probably seen the attention spans of students change. You've seen just the way students absorb learning change. Has that been kind of a fascinating journey? Because I always hear stories specifically now of like, um, you know, schools closing because of or academic reasons or funding and all this kind of stuff, and then test scores being low. In the United States, it's a huge education problem that seems to be never ending and never fixable.
Mm.
So being in kind of academia for a long time, have you seen kind of the ebbs and flows of the way students absorb information?
Mm. It's in my life, I've really only had two relatively brief periods of university teaching, of university work. When I was in my 20s, I did that for a while before I even had a degree, in fact.
which is crazy. I
Yeah,
think
yeah, it was.
I
That's the 70s. Like, it could
yeah.
never happen again. There was still a sort of a hippie moment in education, which was a very great moment, I think, in education around the world, sort of radical pedagogy, where it was like, hey, you know something, come in and teach it. Who cares about
You're
the
almost like Jack Black in School of Rock.
exactly,
In a
exactly.
way.
Super fan of film gets to teach a class. You know, like
Yeah.
you know, like
I would even say like a Robin Williams in,
Dead
Dead
Poets
Poets
Society.
Society, kind
Yeah,
of
Yeah, I go
ingratiating
to
young
the School of
minds.
Rock
Okay.
image.
I
I
tried to
love
go a little
it.
more academic there, but I got you.
But so I did that in my 20s, and then much later in my 50s, I was invited by a university, basically because I still had no degree, and I was invited to sort of get a degree, a PhD, by presenting my past work, like the first 30 years of my work, by condensing it and sort of putting it together into a thesis, and that's how I ended up becoming a professor, from being someone with not a degree to being a professor. Which is not a bad way to do it, and I was very lucky that it happened for me. And so then it was, it was in near the end of the 2000s that I started teaching again, basically 2007 through to 2014, and that was my second period of teaching. So I definitely see the differences between the 80s and that period in the 21st century, the difference between those two centuries. In the 80s, it was pretty easy to encourage students to read things, to read a lot of articles, essays, sometimes whole books, and this is all much harder now. That's what I hear from all of my friends who are involved in university teaching, is it's so hard to get kids to do reading, any kind of serious, stick with it reading. Is really hard, and I mean, it's just part of the whole kind of incredible speeded up culture that you were talking about before, Stephen. This sort of speeded up, accelerated, where we're all in our own groove of consumption of, whether it's TikTok and Wikipedia or whatever the heck it is, and whatever online thing we're into, that we get our information from. And that's harder, and also the attention span to watch films is this is a whole thing that has changed a lot. In the 80s, there was no problem with arranging screenings of 2 hours, of 3 hours, of 4 hours. Students would stick with it because back in those days we had 16mm projectors. We were projecting films in a special designed theatre room in the university. Or we were hiring a cinema around the corner, and so we'd actually be watching these films in prints. However, the moment that it all changed over to first using video, VHS, and then later DVD and Blu-ray in universities and schools, this was a crisis because, of course, kids say, "Why should I watch a DVD at the university when I can watch it at home? I can watch it on my laptop. I can watch it on my phone." And now things are kind of falling out of alignment a bit because we're not having, as a group, as an interactive group of learning, we're not having that experience of watching the film together, of immediately talking about the film, of me introducing the film before it starts. All of this kind of communal experience has disappeared, and the student may or may not watch it, all of it, on the phone, Yeah. So this is a crisis for film teaching, and some film teachers have just had to go with it and say, "Okay, I recommend that you watch Citizen Kane by next week. You can watch it here, there, and everywhere, and on your phone, and we'll talk about it when we get together." And that can still work to some extent, and in some ways, of course, students are getting a much wider access to a whole lot of things. I remember there was a very definite day where I realised something had changed when this was around 2009, 2010, and I was in a classroom speaking, and I started talking about what was then a rare film. I think it might have been Wanda by Barbara Loden. This was, of course, long before it came out on Criterion. It was Barbara Loden's Wanda, which I had seen on like a French DVD release or something. And I was telling the class about this film and about how rare the film is. And if you have a chance to see it somewhere in the world, you've got to take that chance. You've got to see this film. And one of the students walked out of the room. And I thought, how rude. He walked out of the room and he came back 5 minutes later and he handed me a USB, and the USB had Wanda on it. He had downloaded it from, some special source.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah.
He just downloaded it and gave it to me, and he said, "Well, it's not that inaccessible anymore."
That is a fascinating time capsule thing, because that type of stuff was happening a lot in the 2000s. If you were a young person growing up, 90s, 2000s, when the internet first hit, it was kind of like a wild, wild west type of thing because you didn't quite know how to use the internet. And then as time progressed, the internet just ended up being used for progressively everything up until it literally runs our lives to this day to a certain extent. And you can find access to literally everything if you look hard enough. I mean, any film or nearly any film, like you were saying, could be found. That was 2009.
Mm.
Nowadays, it's even easier because with the kind of the technology the way it is, as soon as it's on disc or on a digital form in any way, that thing is plopped on the internet somewhere and
Yeah.
it's accessed by anyone. So the access to it is it takes away a little bit of the magic from it. It really does. The
Mm.
mystique of cinema, the enigma of it all, where you had
It's a
to,
mindset thing.
yeah, it
I
takes
mean, like,
a little bit
sorry, go
of
ahead.
it. Well, I
Yeah.
was just
Well,
saying, it just takes away from that.
I was gonna say, like, we talk about like 60-something-year-olds being closed mind can be, suppressing of that, but also today I feel like young people can almost be the same thing. They have grown up with a certain lifestyle and they think a certain lifestyle is the way that you should consume things.
Mm,
You should consume things on it's okay to consume things on your phone. It's okay to consume things on your laptop. And now we're fighting the fight of trying to say, no, 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 wait a second. I get it. This is the new shiny thing and it's accessible and it's nice, but I'm telling you the better experience overall is going to be in the theater
Mm.
on a big screen
yeah, it's the rapid changing of technology. The technology in the last 20-25 years has
yeah.
rapidly advanced to the point where things that came out 5 to 10 years ago are considered ancient by now. I
Yes.
mean, have you ever
Yeah.
seen the YouTube videos of young people today? Like, you hand them an iPod and they don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But in the 2000s, an
Yeah.
iPod was revolutionary.
Mm.
I mean, they just had it, like, I think an anniversary of like one of the first iPods coming out, and that was like 15, 16 years ago. And but from then to now, just the newer generation doesn't know what that is because it just
Yeah.
doesn't. They didn't grow up with it. They never used it. It's not talked about because we moved on to the next thing. And then with home media entertainment, we've kind of Blu-rays, DVDs, all that stuff is still around, but people have now moved on to the digital world, the streaming of it all, and
Mm.
whatnot. And Adrian, I would like to get your take on it since you've kind of seen really the evolution of home media and consumption of movies from
Mm.
theatrical exhibition all the way up through home video, and then in the digital realm now.
Mm.
What is your take on digital media, just in general?
Well, I mean, I'm all for it at one level, and of course, I love the theatrical experience of being in a good, film theatre and projection and print and good sound system and so on. I mean, that is a great experience. I mean, as a really little kid, my dad took me off to see the Sergio Leone westerns, and they were big commercial releases, of course, the Clint Eastwood films. And I had no idea who Sergio Leone was, when I was a kid. But those films are just such powerful experiences of image and sound, and the landscape and the human face and, action and poetry, they're just fantastic. They're imprinted on my mind from those theatrical experiences. But as I said, I also learned a lot about cinema from television, from, black and white television. So I'm not the kind of person who says, I'm not a purist at that level. I don't say we should only have the theatrical experience, 35 mil, whatever, 70 mil, and, because I discovered a lot on television. These days I watch an awful lot on my laptop, that seems to me quite an okay form for a whole lot of a range of things, and and the whole world of streaming and so on has, on the one hand, as you've both been saying, it creates incredible new access. That anything you want to see is out there basically somewhere. But often, I think the missing factor is you need a spark of curiosity. I once heard film criticism and film teaching defined as an incitement to desire. Like, you've got to give someone the spark to desire, to want to see something, perhaps to see something they've never seen before. I'll give you a contemporary example. The film EO, by Jerzy Skolimowski. Absolutely great film, and I'm sure it's great to see it on a big screen in a theatre. That must be amazing to see that film in that way. Now, Skolimowski is a director that I absolutely worship. I think he's a great, great filmmaker. And in the case of Skolimowski, I would like to incite people not only to watch EO, which is great, but go right back, go back to the start, go back to the 60s and watch Walkover by Skolimowski, watch Le Départ, which is one of my 10 favourite films in the Sight and Sound canon poll. Watch Deep End, extraordinary film that he made in Britain. Watch Moonlighting that he made in the I mean, there are so many great films, different films in different countries in different styles that Skolimowski has made. They all have this incredible energy, incredible sort of vision, incredible visceral power, physicality, sensuality. I mean, that's in a case where, I want to incite people to go back in Skolimowski's career, not just to see the one that was nominated for an Academy Award, blah, 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 EO, but to go back, and this is true of many filmmakers, let's try to build the bridge between now and then, the present and the past. This is one of the most important things I think that film critics can do, is to create curiosity, incite desire to go back into the films of the past and see them anew, see them in relation to current films. That's very important.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things, and I even get this from my own wife, is just getting people to correlate, like that like not necessarily the quality of what you're watching, but like the aesthetics of a film, being that, films back then were black and white, and the film technology wasn't as advanced as it is now. And it's like, just on that level, some people don't even want to discover things because they're like, oh, that just looks like it's an old timey movie. They don't act, their acting's not as good as the acting now. It's like, well, that was a different time. A lot of stage actors became film actors. The writing was different then. The way that films,
the language was different.
The language was different. It was not, and that's what should be interesting. But for a lot of people, it becomes the turnoff because it's not what they are used to. And and that's what I say when it comes to the younger generation, is that they get obsessed with. And this is in a way every generation's problem. We think that the time that we lived in is the best time, and so like
we're very egotistical.
Kids these days, they look at the life they're living in, and they look at all the new entertainment coming out, and they're like, this is the best time. I'm living in the best time that there is to live. And to an extent, they're right. To another extent, they're not understanding what they're missing out on because they won't go back.
And you can't quite explain that. You can tell them that, growing up in a specific time frame, whether it be the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever the decade may be, you can tell them how it was. You can describe it to them, but you can't.
It's an experience that you have to let them.
You can't recreate the experience of it because it's unique to you, and two, it's unique just to that generation in and of itself. So you can't really. I don't fault them for that, but I think when it comes to introducing them to older films or just classic films, you got to find the right ones that are really grab them. Because I think there's a lot of films that we keep talking about here on not only on the podcast but just I guess in general, is that some films have staying power for a very long time. Some films are incredibly contemporary because they're still dealing with social and thematic issues that were prevalent back then that still exist today when it comes to just culture, when it comes to maybe something like civil rights or something like gender equality or something like LGBTQ rights and all that kind of stuff. All this stuff keeps existing within our society, and the film is often a reflection of things that are going on. And if that's what's going on then, and it's still going on now, people can relate to that. I mean, it's really, I think that's what really kind of keeps cinema going, is its relevancy keeps getting more and more relevant. In many ways, I think a lot of things that were science fiction or just outlandish fiction at one point have become reality by this point, to the point where it's not so ridiculous anymore to see people in spaceships flying in space, because that occurs, or something even more outlandish of like even political films that we've seen in the past where some candidate is propped up as a phony puppet candidate, and it's like, yeah, that happens now. You know, I'm
It's always
thinking of
happened.
maybe A Face in the Crowd by Eli Kazan just pops in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just like, yeah, that happens all the time.
Mm.
It's kind of interesting, the staying power of cinema.
Mm.
If
I
you
mean,
allow it. Yeah. Yeah.
mm, I think that's one of the great things that I experienced when I was a teacher is that you can see this happen. That, you know, for instance, I give you a great example: the films of Ernst Lubitsch. You know, the comedies of Ernst Lubitsch. You know, you show To Be or Not to Be, or, you know, Design for Living, or Trouble in Paradise to a group of young students, and most of them are completely knocked out. Like that, it completely confuses their idea that you were mentioning, Stephen, of, oh yes, these old time films with the rickety acting and the dialogue, and they watch a Lubitsch film and it's so modern. It's so modern, and it's so modern on the issues that you're talking about, Andrew: sex, gender, morality, ethics, relationships. I mean, it's all there in you know, Design for Living by Lubitsch. The film is still a radical vision of, you know, how people relate to each other, you know, personally, intimately, sexually, and every other way. Uh, you know, Fritz Lang, you mentioned, you know, civil rights issues. You know, you show them a Fritz Lang movie, like Fury or Scarlet Street, or, you know, one of the great masterpieces of Fritz Lang. And there's nothing old timey about it, you know. I mean, of course, these are issues, you know, we're still dealing with, and these particular artists like Lang and Lubitsch, you know, two of the greatest of all filmmakers, you know, they had insight and foresight into the way these things were going to play out. You know, they had a vision of history, and they also had a vision of the future. You know, Fritz Lang was an incredibly futuristic thinking guy. I mean, of course, he made Metropolis, and we see his visions of the future. But even on the questions of the newspaper industry, the television industry, these things that he was putting into his last American films in the mid-50s, he already had a vision of how important television would be within mass culture, within popular culture. So, of course, you know, these things, when we see them now, we're struck by them. We can see them in a new way, you know, because we've lived some more history. We can relate it with that, you know. This is all part of the adventure, I think, of really studying and loving films.
Yeah. And for me, I think when it comes to, you know, for those of you who are interested on kind of the history of the production side of things, a lot of the things that were done decades upon decades ago were then emulated by a lot of modern day uh, um, filmmakers. I always go back to the new Hollywood in the 1970s when it comes to American cinema. All of those people that you know that are still working today: Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, that whole generation of people got their influence and got their sense of cinema through the past and kind of brought it into their present and are continuing it to today. And then the filmmakers and generations after them learned from them. So it's like a domino effect. It's like, you know, the past, you know, then the next generation, and then so on and so forth. And you see that ripple effect happen all the way to today. To, you know, we just talked about the modern Marvel blockbusters. That type of, you know, scope when it comes to epic filmmaking goes all the way back to things like, um, you know, the Cecil B. DeMille epics, Ten
I
Commandments,
mean,
things like that.
even westerns. I
Yeah,
mean,
I was even saying
yeah.
westerns, you know, the samurai films of Akira Kurosawa. It was Akira Kurosawa's birthday, I think yesterday, of this filming. That'll put people like when we actually filmed it. I'll give you a sense. But it's like, you know, he kind of made the Western epic for Japanese cinema. And then the culture here took what he did and brought it back and then redid it again for future generations because they took what he took from us here. It just kind of shows just like the evolution of cinema kind of feeds upon itself to grow and grow and grow.
Mm.
And it kind of never ends because every generation, I think, learns from the past
Mm.
and then kind of adapts it into the present and then takes it into the future.
I absolutely agree with you, Andrew. No question. And, you know, and for me, the issue then becomes, you know, that there's sometimes the canon, as it's called, the sort of the list of the great films gets too small. You know, it gets too restricted. And if what filmmakers are feeding off are, you know, definitely great films. Citizen Kane, Vertigo, Seven Samurai, you know, The Godfather. I mean, all good films. But if the list gets restricted to that again and again and again, if we're getting this very reduced canon, you know, that's why, for instance, I thought it was great when Chantal Ackerman's Jeanne Dielman topped the Sight and Sound poll. It wasn't the result of a conspiracy. It wasn't anything rigged. It was a pure expression of a revolt, and it was great. You know, Chantal Ackerman is one of my favourite filmmakers. Also, somebody that I had the privilege of knowing a little bit personally, and you know, that's great. Suddenly, there's, you know, all these people right now are watching Jeanne Dielman. You know, some will be perplexed, some will be amazed. You know, people are wondering, where did this film come from? I've never heard of this person, Chantal Ackerman. What's this film from? What, Belgium? You know, what? And this is all for the good, right? Because it expands the canon away from an essentially American basis or English language basis. You know, it brings in other cultures. It brings in experimental film, you know, avant-garde film. These things are incredibly important, right? I've mentioned in teaching, you know, I saw the effect, the good effect of showing a Lubitsch or a Lang, but also, you know, certain experimental films, Maya Deren, you know, Meshes of the Afternoon, some of the Austrian avant-garde filmmakers of our time, like Peter Czerkaski, you know, who reworks bits from American films like The Entity, the horror film The Entity. He made 3 experimental films out of reworking bits of The Entity, you know, and in my lecturing and stuff, I'll often use both The Entity, which I love, and Czerkaski, you know, use one of his shorts, and people are amazed by Czerkaski's shorts. They're so visceral, they're so powerful on the eye and on the ear, and so he's taking contemporary horror of the 80s and totally reworking it in an experimental way. So I think in this constant reworking of the past that you're talking about, Andrew, you know, let's expand the canon as far as we can, you know, and try to always bring in new elements to kind of move the canon around a little bit.
Yeah, it shuffles. Not only does it shuffle things up, but it's a more accurate reflection of the changing and evolution of cinema. When you introduce these new films into the, you know, quote unquote canon, it shines a light on them, but it also kind of reflects the changing of the time in terms of the audiences that exist now. The audience that exists now are not the same that exist 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So the films I think that are considered the best of the best, I think need to reflect the modern day audiences. And oftentimes there are certain modern day films that best reflect the diversity within the audience, you know, just because of the access to it, of the diversity of the different things that the films are discussing. Um, yeah, I was very happy when they shook up that Sight and Sound list, because I mean, think for decades upon decades, it was kind of the same. You always
Yeah.
get the same type of cinema. It's kind of when a streaming site, I don't need to pick on streaming sites, but when they have like a classic quote movie section, it's always the usual suspects. Casablanca, Gone with the Wind, all of the, you know, the usual ones you always see. And it's like there's more to that than just the ones that we all know about in culture. You got to dig a little deeper. Yet again, that probably goes to like licensing access and distribution rights and stuff like that, as the case always tends to
Sure.
be. But it's like there's more to classic cinema than seeing the same, you know, black and white films that Stephen mentioned before. You know,
Mm.
there's more. For example, Orson Welles, one of my favorite filmmakers of all time, kind of a hero of mine in cinema. Citizen Kane is known as his masterwork, but there's a whole other group of his work that I don't think people talk about that is so more vastly interesting than I would think Citizen Kane is. And vastly interesting in the sense like he was making films that no one was making at the time and that wouldn't really make for decades, you know, talking about surreal cinema and stuff like that. I think of The Trial with Anthony Perkins. That film is decades ahead of just anything. And it's just, you know, all of his work, it kind of gets like kind of not talked about because Citizen Kane is the title. You know what I mean? It was #1 on lists all over the world. It's his masterwork that he made when he was so young. It's all of those things. But then there's just a whole list of other films that are just probably as equally interesting or even vastly more interesting because of Orson Welles has always been kind of an enigma for me because it's the great unknown. You know, Adrian, I did get to listen to your audio commentary of the Immortal Story, which was his last uh, I was gonna say feature length, but I don't think it's quite feature length. His last kind of fictional narrative story of his career, and that was 1968, and he wouldn't pass away till several, almost 2 decades later, and he never got to make another narrative feature past that hour-long television film. But there's always kind of an enigma of what the possibilities were, and that's just like one wrinkle in cinema is like what are the hidden possibilities that certain filmmakers never got to make, or there's always Stanley Kubrick never got to make his Napoleon film, and there's talk of that being revived now, and that I find that interesting because how is that going to look with modern filmmaking versus what he would do? I know he left extensive notes, but he was trying to compile that decades upon decades ago.
It's gonna be a lot more close-up shots to the face because Spielberg's
it's gonna be it's gonna be dolly shots.
That's for sure. The slow movement
move-ins,
with
the magic hour happening. Yeah,
I'm expecting. There won't be 125 takes. I don't think for certain scenes.
Probably not.
Probably not.
But but kind of circling around to I think kind of what we're talking about here. That with kind of not limiting the canonization of film history. I think that a lot of that has to, is the job of film criticism to help navigate people into them realms of other parts of cinema, as you've talked about before. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, because I know in your career, you've, especially in recent years, you've had a lot to say about the quality of that criticism, noticing that a lot of, the way that either newspapers, because you did leave the Age paper after a while because you were getting fed up with that situation, I think. And also just in general, it seems like, I talked about it before, like a lot of the big mainstream films get the attention, so what just a little bit about what you're feeling on some of the negative aspects of how film criticism, where it's been going, and just what we can do to improve that.
Well, what we can do to improve it is a big open question. I don't necessarily have terribly good answers to it, other than that people should do their own thing, as in starting their own things. I mean, I'm someone who began several online film magazines. The Rouge was one, Lola was another that I did with various other people. I was involved with the early days of Censors of Cinema online. Now, these were all kinds of activities, sort of experiments where, cinephiles were getting together and saying, we can't read what we want to read. We're not seeing the kind of commentary, in-depth, excited, informed commentary. We're not getting it anymore in newspapers, in some of the popular magazines. And it's, the newspaper scene is just like the saddest thing in the world, that specialised commentary on all of the arts, not just film, of course, but specialised commentary on all the arts. It's just been squeezed out more and more. Film got squeezed out first because it was regarded as just the entertainment medium, and so, the newspaper that I worked for still, had some cultural investment in, reviewing the opera from a critical standpoint. But when it came to reviewing the superhero movie, it's like, we don't need it, or we can just sort of run a thing which says, if you like this kind of film, you'll like this kind of film. The whole aspect of actually engaging with films was falling more and more out of newspapers, and more critics lost their jobs, and more hacks came into these jobs. And so film is particularly in a difficult situation because there's always been this assumption that, everybody is a critic, everybody loves movies or not, everybody has an opinion on movies. So why not just anybody can be a reviewer in a website or in a newspaper or in a magazine? Why can't it just be anybody? It's a democratic, blah, blah. It's the democratic medium. And of course, cinema is a democratic medium. We should never forget that. Yes, of course. And I'm certainly not someone who believes that, only credentialed professors should be allowed to speak about cinema. I mean, that has never been my position in my life. I'm not an elitist in that sense. I'm far more of a populist, but I'm a populist with a brain, and I like populists to have brains. It's like the famous thing that one of my heroes, Serge Daney, said. He said, a film critic is someone, who loves a film and who knows something about film and who knows how to say what they know about a film, right? So it's got to be not just love of a film. It's got to be an idea about a film. It's got to be a communication about the ideas of that film and the interest of that film and the value of that film. This is what has dropped out of a lot of film reviewing, a lot of film criticism. I'm always sort of, in my own way, just trying to press people, for instance, just read a bit more. I mean, there's so much available there to read online and anywhere else you can get your hands on it. It's not a hard thing these days. You don't have to have a special card to get into a university library to read, really great stuff about cinema, in-depth stuff, And so I'm always trying to encourage people, we'll read, you don't have to agree with everything you read, of course, but process it into yourself, see what you agree with, see what you don't agree with, and then arrive at your own personal point of view. Don't just start with, I like the film, 4 stars,
Yeah, I think, I see what you're saying. Definitely. There's a, as we talked about before, there's a little bit of a fast food nature to the way people like to consume criticism too, with how, like you said, kind of people are coming in, they're just kind of summarizing the movie, not really giving a lot of really in-depth analysis of the movies. But I also think there's this kind of sense of, especially now, we noticed this during the pandemic as well, like the sense of not being looking towards experts for things, like people that really have a well-rounded knowledge of something. People kind of almost, I mean, even for I think me and Andrew, people being very big film enthusiasts that watch a lot of films, we even get shunned upon sometimes for being maybe a little bit too much in the know, maybe being a little pretentious for knowing something that the casual movie person doesn't know. Then when we try to talk about it to people, we get looked at like we're acting snooty or something. And I think that happens on all levels. I think people can get a little bit offended because they think you're maybe trying to pull something over on them, like that you're acting like you're smarter than they are, and it could offend people easily. People can get very sensitive about people being pretentious, but people like to overuse that. But I think people, they just get annoyed that people know something that they don't.
Right. There is, I mean, this has been probably slow growing for many, many years now. There is an anti-intellectual mindset, whereas those who are intellectuals, those who maybe speak in certain terms, use larger words, if you will, are, like you just said, are seen as pretentious, as seen as, above it, if you will. And there's a whole pushback against them without, I think, actually reading what they're saying. Just kind of taking that, oh, that person has a PhD, therefore he's an elitist. You know what I mean? Kind of just quick judgments and stuff like that. But I think that has kind of expanded over the last several years. I don't think Rotten Tomatoes has helped a lot in that regard. I think in terms of film criticism, I think it's probably negatively affected film criticism because all people see are the numbers. They just see the percentages of, and they see either rotten or fresh.
I mean, we also talked about this with just a tad with Tony Stella, the illustratist. He fights the fight of in his profession just against people that and there's nothing wrong with people that are graphic designers that use the computer to make their art, but sometimes he has to defend the fact that he is somebody that uses his hands, physically makes artwork, and does his art in this whole other way that's a little bit more his own. He's making the thing completely him, and of course he cleans up things on the computer too and stuff. Does some that he utilizes that, but he sometimes has to remind people that he does that extra thing that some people don't do. That they pull images that have already been created by other people and mesh them together to make. And so
Digital
the same thing happens with film
like
criticism a lot, is that you're having people that really put a lot of their own thoughts into their articles and their essays, but a lot of people are just kind of cut and pasting and pulling things and not really actually putting their own selves into their writing.
Right. And I think a lot of that, I mean, we are in the digital, we're in the internet age now. And I think the invention of blogging, video blogging, YouTube, all that stuff, where people essentially became kind of, everyday film critics, if you will, or movie reviewers or stuff like that. I know I did it. I did it for 3 years on YouTube and whatnot. I mean, and it's a tough medium to be intellectual in, or to be relatively in depth in, one, because you've gotta play to an audience. You've gotta, be interesting. You gotta be on camera, which is a whole other facet than writing is. And you've gotta, and it can't be long and in depth. It can't be, it can't be 2 hours long. It can't be
we
anything
don't
like
care
that.
about that. We don't care about that here. We do 3-hour shows. So.
Yeah, I'm just saying, but I mean, this is podcasting is essentially like internet radio, where you can go as long as you want.
Sure. Yeah.
But movie reviews and stuff like that, I noticed that you can't be the same as when you were writing, because I wrote for a blog and then I did the YouTube stuff afterwards when it came to movie writing and stuff like that, and it was completely different format. You know what I mean? In writing, you could kind of work at it, shape it, form it the way you want it to be. In the video realm, you kind of it had to be already semi-formed when you were doing it. And then of course you could edit things afterward, clean things up, but it's not like writing, where you could cut out whole paragraphs and rewrite everything and whatnot. So, and I think, kind of getting back to what Adrian was saying about kind of the shift of criticism kind of, leaving the printed form, it did kind of go into the digital realm on the internet, but even then it's gotten probably even more complex. What I just mentioned with Rotten Tomatoes, with blogs and all that kind of stuff. If anything, there's so much of it that in a way it's a negative thing. There are so many people, movie critics online, or movie reviewers, more appropriately titled, that there's so much opinion upon of movies. Just if you go on Twitter after a movie comes out, you're going to see every opinion under the sun. It's going to be endless.
But it's okay to have a lot of opinions. It's just
that's what people gravitate towards, is the social media of it all.
Yeah.
Like younger viewers, younger people who watch cinema are going to go immediately to social media for their movie opinions, as opposed to going to a movie critic's blog or a movie critic in print. They're going to go for something fast and easy and easily digestible. And I think just the audience has shifted, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, for me, one of the sort of things that can be done in this situation, as modest as it is, but I think it's significant, is that for me it's been important that there have been some individuals, some groups who have tried to sort of offer a kind of guide, and I'm thinking of people like Catherine Grant, who does her blog site Film Studies for Free, which is basically just lists and recommendations, but always very definite, very pointed. If you're interested in Skolomovsky, here's 10 really great articles from all over the world. And someone like Ruben Demisure, he's a guy in Belgium, and he works on the website Subsian, and he does book roundup. But it's a book roundup that's far more open and extensive than you'll ever see in more mainstream places. It's not just American books, right? not just English language books. But he talks about books that he's picked up at film festivals, books he's found from small publishers, all about film, right? All cinema related, cinema and art related. And Ruben gives you an amazing guide. I've discovered personally so many things through his recommendations and Catherine's recommendations. So it's like we need guides. That's the thing. There's so much out there. There's too much out there, as you're saying, Andrew. And once again, we need that incitement, that curiosity. It's like if you want a more in-depth view, don't just fall into the bloody echo chamber of Twitter. I actually have to actively avoid that sometimes. If I know that I want to write, for instance, about the current film, fairly current film, Tar, Todd Field's film, I don't want to go onto Twitter and read 6 billion, I hate it, I love it, I hate it, I love it, it's sexist, it's this, it's misogynist, it's racist, it's, this is not helping me to fall into this echo chamber, because a lot of what passes for film criticism now is either, as you were saying, Stephen, sort of cut and paste of the echo chamber. It's like some people say it's racist and some people say it's not, and it's like, oh, good Lord, give us an opinion, give us an analysis of your own, don't just.
Well, it's also, I think some reviewers, it's also a reaction to what they assume how the reader's going to consume things is. So they're trying to give a broad opinion because they think that it's the best way to sum up what their thoughts are. But ultimately, what does everybody a favor, not only the consumer, but also for criticism as a whole, is to have an opinion and have a distinct opinion and it be your own, and it to just be a part of the organism as it is, and let it be unique. Because if you're trying to just not have an opinion because you're afraid that people won't like it, then you're not. You're not doing anybody any favors. And I think that kind of leans into, you've had some criticism of film criticism, and even, what you do with audio commentaries, that itself is something you've done for years, and you've done many commentaries. I think it's over 70, right? Just way up there. And so even to that art form of criticism, because it's that's its own kind of form of criticism by itself. It's an analysis of a film over its runtime and really getting into the background, and everybody's got different styles. And so even there, you've had your times where you've even pointed out the lack in that department of audio and commentaries where there's not enough being done, or people are not putting in enough time. Or speak to that a little bit for me.
Well, it's simply that it's along the lines of what I was saying before, that I just think people should read a bit more and just get a sense of what film analysis really is. That I think we have too much weight these days on like sheer opinion. I love it, I hate it, 4 stars, 2 stars. We've got this sort of sheer opinion industry that we all become part of through social media and through our hot takes and all this nonsense. And what gets lost there is that to really go in depth to a film, you've got to have some tools. You've got to have a bit of methodology of, how do you understand? For me, the question is always, how do I understand how the form or the style of a film meshes or doesn't mesh with its subject, with its content? And, I've spent a lifetime so far studying that and studying how different filmmakers have done it and different films have achieved it or not achieved it, so to really, get into how a narrative is formed, trying to work out what were the challenges that the director faced in this project, and what not only did they want to convey, but what did they have to convey? What was it that had to be clear or not clear in this film? So every film comes with a whole series of art and craft questions, of how it was made, what it expresses, what it can be connected to in the broader culture, as Andrew was talking about before. So for me, I believe that, it's really good to read the way people have developed these tools, across many years. I mean, for me personally, I've always been interested in the history of film criticism. I've tried to read as widely as possible in magazines, in books, and so on. All different styles of critical writing, and I try to sort of bring that into myself in order to form my own analysis. There's a moment where there comes a moment where it is just you and the film, and you're really trying to make sense of that film in front of you, and that's the best moment in a sense, but it has to be informed by by the wider context of what you've read, of what people have done before you in this area, and so that's why sometimes I think that the particular point of the criticisms I've made in this area in regards to DVD is that I think sometimes the producers, the commissioners of DVD extras, say, Blu-ray extras, maybe they need to look a little further afield, to really look for. I'm not saying they have to look for the university lecturer, that's not necessarily the best person at all. Each of us proves ourselves by what we do, by what we actually write or what we actually say. But I think if you look around the internet, at the very least, sometimes you're going to find people who are currently not in the circles of people that are called upon to speak in DVD audio commentaries, for instance. I can think of many fine living film critics who are good talkers, who have never been asked to do a commentary. Because, as in all realms of human activity, people tend to draw upon their immediate circle of the friends they have, of the people they trust, who they know will deliver good work on time. I totally understand all of that. I worked in a newspaper. I know how that works. But you have to take a chance sometimes to get outside of your own circle, outside of your own culture, and go ask somebody else.
Well, yeah, I think it's important that we're getting different voices on all different types of releases. I mean, and I agree. I think that there are some certain, especially certain labels that you always see the same names on their commentaries or their video essays, and they yeah, I get it. Like you said, they get comfortable with certain people being their voices, and there can be good and bad things to that, but I think it's a film by film thing for me. I think I want the right voice on the right film, and sometimes you want something that might be because as you've talked about, like there are different types of audio commentaries too. We've even talked about it on here before, like there's types of commentaries that are done by filmmakers themselves. They're very kind of loose and like almost like cut and pasted together, in the sense of like they're just talking about things that happen behind the scenes, and they're not necessarily done in any kind of real kind of research heavy way. They're kind of just a way for a filmmaker to kind of look back on that time. But then when you're talking about people that are really hired to do audio commentaries, you got people that have different styles. They have and the style that I picked up on when listening to some of yours, I listened to one particular one. I listened to the Crash audio commentary, which I thought was really great. I thought, your style, you really take you take it, and some people don't like this. And even for certain movies, I don't like this, but you really take it scene by scene, and you kind of talk about thematic elements about each scene. And I think when it comes to something like a David Cronenberg, that works really well, because he's a filmmaker that subliminally puts things in his scenes. Visually, he's using a language that's not always as easy to get, especially on a first viewing or even a second viewing. You do a really good job of bringing context and bringing a sense of really learning about what's going on in the film as we're following it, and not maybe getting too caught up in like kind of rambling on about maybe personal history with the movie, or like, which is a good thing. I like that. I like personal history being brought into a commentary, because I think that it makes the voice that I'm listening to more personable, And I think but that's also another style of audio commentary where there's some commentators that's what they lean on. They lean on a lot of talking about their own personal context of watching this film and where they brought it from their history. And then of course, adding in all that other stuff of like contextual stuff around it, like what the actors went through, what was happening behind the scenes. And I think that they're all great. I think they can all work in their own way.
Cool.
I think it's just a film by film thing. I think it's what is best for the film. And like you said, sometimes maybe these producers of these of these extras are not maybe thinking about that aspect as much. They're more kind of going with their reliable people. But yeah, I mean, do you agree with any of that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything you just said, Stephen. It's as you say, there are many styles of doing it. All styles can work. That was in fact something Orson Welles himself said about Shakespeare. He said there are any number of ways of playing Shakespeare, of presenting Shakespeare, and as long as it works, it's good. Whatever way that it can work, it's good. And for something to work is a mixture of, it's a good experience to listen to. In the case of audio commentary, it's engaging. It teaches you something. It introduces new ideas to you. For my own style, I err more on the side of analysis and ideas, less so about background information. I think if it's pertinent, I use background production information. But I don't go into the whole life story of this actor and so on and so forth, unless there's a point to that. I tend to use personal experience. For instance, the first time I saw a film, I only use that if there's really a point to it. If it introduces an idea, I'll use personal experience. So yeah, there are all kinds of styles and all kinds of material that can be used in an audio commentary. I just sort of sometimes wish that some audio commentators, and particularly the producers who are commissioning them, just would stretch a bit further, because you have to understand, I've always been in a strange sort of position between worlds. I worked in the world of journalism and newspapers. I've worked in the world of the university. And in both places, I met prejudice. When I was in the newspaper, other journalists would say to me, "What a pretentious intellectual you are," And then when I was in the university, I would get knocked back for funding on some project, and the assessment would say, "Adrian Martin is just a journalist."
Yeah.
He's just a newspaper guy, right? So I've seen this from both sides of the fence. I've seen the exclusions. I've seen the stereotypes from both sides of the fence. And so for me, the whole question of audio commentary is to sort of have a path that is not one thing or the other. That is not solely journalism, and it's not solely let's have fun, making gags about this film, and it's not pure, academies either. It's just trying to talk very directly to people's brains, about the experience of the whole experience, emotional, intellectual, physical, everything, the whole experience that cinema can be, because I think another somewhat failing of the current film critical scene is that there's such emphasis now on enthusiasm, on pure enthusiasm and pure love. Now, enthusiasm and love, incredibly important things. I have them too, for cinema and for many, many films.
You have to be as to do the work that you have
Absolutely.
to. it's a motivating factor. Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's not an end in itself. For me, it is not enough to simply say, I love it. I'm enthusiastic about it. Okay, love it, but then take us somewhere with that love. Take us into the thoughts that you've had because you love it. Where did love lead you with this film? That's what I want to know. It's not enough for me to hear that somebody saw the film when they were 13 and they loved it. I was reading recently what I think is a very painful book. That's Tarantino's book of, cinema speculation or whatever the hell it's called. And it's just this endless list of, I saw this film when I was 13 at this drive-in, with my mother. And it's like, so what, Quentin? So what? tell me something about the film that I don't already know. I know the plot of the film. I know that, Robert Forster's in it. Tell me something else. Or tell me something about your own films, Quentin, that somehow these films inform, and I get nothing of that from Tarantino's book. It's a worthless book, in my opinion.
It
And,
sounds
I
very.
haven't,
It sounds
I
very
haven't,
much like him, though. If you've ever seen him in interviews, it's
it's
him talking about movies that
it's a
he
self
saw.
he I mean, as much as I go back and forth on Tarantino, but he is a person that's very much about his point of view
or his
and
own
wants people to
experience
his
with
his
movies.
experience of film and stuff. But yeah, I mean, the roadblocks that you can have, that you were mentioning about, like, being labeled as a particular type of film person. I mean, it happens to I think it happens to a lot of people in your position. Like, you're wanting to do work, but you're being labeled as just a pretentious film guy. But I think it happens for other people in the business too. There's a lot of other commentators that get labeled as not being educated because they didn't go to a university, or that their educations come from watching movies. I mean, Tarantino is a great example. Tarantino himself is not an educated film. He didn't get filmmaking degree, but his knowledge came from just watching movies. And I think that prejudice happens too for a lot of other commentators, that they get put in a position where they get labeled as not maybe not being the person for this, because they don't on the surface look like they have the education to talk about a certain subject matter. And so I think that it happens a lot with a lot of other people too. And I think that that's a problem. It's a problem.
Yeah. Let me be clear about this. Where the question of education is not a question of university certification. It's nothing to do with having a university degree or being doctor, professor, whatever. It's education is what you get for yourself, however way you get it, whether it's through a university, whether it's through reading the internet, whether it's through going to a library, whether it's through talking to friends. We educate ourselves, right? And there's always room to educate ourselves more. This I firmly believe, right? And, sometimes I think that, people who get kind of reduced obsessions with particular kinds of films and so on, they're not educating themselves further. They've educated themselves to know every name on the credit of an Italian exploitation movie. That's great. I'm glad they know it. But they should be reading a bit further, I mean, as you say, with Tarantino, I too have mixed feelings about Tarantino. I like some of his films a lot. And he has educated himself in a certain way. But when he talks about, for instance, his love of the film reviewer, Kevin Thomas, I think it is, that he goes on and on about in that book, I can't help but think, Quentin, why didn't you read Robin Wood as well? Why didn't you read Raymond Durniat as well? Why didn't you read, Molly Haskell, Laura Mulvey, whoever? Just get outside of, your one track guy, Kevin Thomas. Just expand your horizon a bit. This is always my point. Is we can also expand our horizons more than we already have.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. I think that's something we're always pushing for on here, is to continue the, trying to educate yourself, trying to expand on what you think you already know, and I think that's important. But not even just education wise. I mean, I think also just people's backgrounds in general are something that influences how they learn about film as well. If you didn't come from if you don't have the ability, and I've brought this up before, the time to invest that much in your education, as much as you would like, then people are going to come at their opinion. They're going to express their opinions in a different way, because they're not coming at it from a purely academic way. They're looking at it as how they filtered their viewing and their opinions of film through their own life. And that's also valuable too. I think that the more we can make criticism of film, it didn't have to necessarily be relatable to everybody, because that's impossible. You can't relate. Everybody can't relate to everybody, because everybody's coming from different backgrounds, from different places around the world. But the more you can hone in on what, you know, how you've experienced film and how it made you feel. And how, like you said, as you've been trying to say, like, we don't want to just hear the surface stuff. We want to hear why, like, not just that you loved it at 13, but that like, how did you feel about it? Like, and how do you feel about it now? Like, has anything changed between then? Like, the more you can bring your own experience into it, I think the more, you know, it can excite people into it. You know, we love movies about making movies. And why we love movies about people that make, you know, like, for instance, Cinema Paradiso is a film that I think a lot of people just really kind of look at that movie as a movie that gets you excited about movies, because you see the love of film in this kid's eyes. We see that image all the time of the kid looking up at the big screen, and we want to know, you know, and then we see his journey through the whole movie. And so we want to know more about where that spark, and what, if we can go back and look at that and expound on it. And I think that there are certain commentators that, like I said, kind of that's their strength, is that they're really good at taking their own experience and melding it into their opinions about film, and not just a purely, like, you know, I know this about the movie and I'm going to express it to you, you know, like, you know, it's coming from them more than it is coming from the books and the things that they read.
Yeah, look, I agree with you. And I would add that you know, I say we should all kind of educate ourselves more and read more, but I also mean we should expand our life more, in the sense of we shouldn't stereotype ourselves. Like, you know, I've met many people, we've all met many people who say things like, you know, I'm a working class, I was born working class, so I hate all this university professor elitism, right? And it's like, they're almost saying, I refuse to read an academic book because it's not me, it's not where I was born, it's not my working class roots. Now, look, I am a working class person. I was born in a working class family. I grew up in a working class suburb. If you could see the thinness of my wallet right now, you'd know I'm more working class than ever. You know, even though I've also, like a whole lot of people, been up and down the social ladder. And yes, I worked in a university for a while, and, you know, but I'm a freelance writer. You know, I'm one of these floating sort of freelance, not rich people, you know. But in my life, I made a decision that, you know, I really wanted to read things, that I wanted to get access to things, you know. I found a way to get into university libraries. I taught myself to read French because I wanted to read, you know, Cahiers de Cinema and Positif magazine. No one told me to do that. My parents hadn't a clue what the hell I was doing, teaching myself French, for God's sakes. You know, they couldn't see any point to this at all. My parents were not culture vultures at all. And similarly, you know, with say film festivals, you know, I saved money for years to take myself to the Rotterdam Film Festival, because I knew there's a certain kinds of films that I would only discover there. I mean, this is in the 90s, right? Before the whole internet explosion. And I knew that if I wanted to watch the films of Raoul Ruiz, of, you know, from the past, Boris Barnett, and even at that time, Abbas Kiarostami, Hosher Shen. If I wanted to really see these films and experience them in the best way and talk about them and meet people who knew about them, I had to save my pennies and book a plane to the Rotterdam Film Festival. And I did that for myself. That changed my life. That expanded my horizons. It introduced me to all kinds of people and magazines and editors and critics. You know, and I did that for myself out of my quote unquote working class roots. So I don't believe that people should stereotype themselves and you know, limit their own options. You know, we can all learn more. We can all have new experiences. You know.
Sure. I there's a lot of motivating factors that go with that. I mean, everybody's way into life is different, you know, like not even if you're working class, not everybody, you know, maybe has the, you know, the makeup of somebody that, you know, or has the lifestyle things that happen for them early on that allows them to be put in a position to even save money to go to a festival. You know, everybody's life starts out.
I mean, look, anyone can, you know, can have the thought, I want a certain life experience, and I'm going to work towards that. That's what I
Sure.
do. You know, it didn't come from my family. It didn't
Yeah.
come from my culture around me. You know, honestly, it came from me, from my drive, from my desire to have an experience, and anyone can have that. That's
Exactly.
important.
It is important. I think it's important that people need to um, have goals and work towards them and work hard to meet that. And I think that gets lost sometimes with people because they're always thinking about the end result, and they're
Mm,
allowing themselves to get unmotivated because people want things fast these days.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so they don't look down the line. They don't think about that this is going to take hard work. Trust me, I work physical labor every day.
yeah,
right.
Having people to do physical labor work every day is difficult for kids. They don't want to get out and do any real work. And that goes along with intellectual stuff too. I think people don't want to spend more time reading, and but that's not everybody. There's people that very much want to do them things, but maybe not always. They get discouraged, or they have certain situations that make it harder for them. So I think it is a hard thing to judge overall, but I do think I understand, and I agree that we should have expectations for the criticism. I think that it's important that we put expectations on the things that are being put out there in the forefront to educate people about film. It's important that stuff is actually giving them some, enriching them, and it's not wasting their time. It's not just giving them bullet points. We need to go deeper. I completely agree with that. So,
yep.
but
I think
Andrew,
we're on the same page there.
Yeah, I would say,
yeah,
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 it's
yeah,
all good stuff. Yeah, I say this all the time. Everybody's life is unique and kind of specific to their situation, to the context of things going on. I mean, some
yeah,
people go down one path and then are forced to go into other path because of either their choice or because of financial reasons, personal reasons, whatever the case may be. Some people don't end up going down the path that they're happy with. And some people are unfortunately are never able to get off of the path that they're unhappy with, and their life just kind of is goes down that path, and they do kind of fall into that. I'll also say this, I guess, to a lot of people listening. It's never too late for a lot of things in life. You
Mm,
know what I mean? If you're not a cinephile at, 19, doesn't mean you can't be one at, 39, or 59 or whatever the case may be. The
mm,
one beautiful thing with cinema, which I've said so many times on this podcast and just in life in general, it it's always there. It doesn't go anywhere. If anything, it just keeps expanding because
it's wait,
time keeps
it's
moving.
waiting on you. It's
It's
waiting
just
on you.
waiting.
Yeah,
It's just this entity that you can travel through anytime you want throughout any
mm,
part of your life,
for sure.
and there's nothing stopping you really now. It's more accessible than ever before.
yeah,
So, and that's the same with film education. There's decades upon decades of books and writings that you have access to. There's documentaries that we haven't really talked about cinema history, about movie history, about
Mm,
production, about all the
absolutely.
new nuances. That's how I kind of learned about all this, is just literally listening to people talk about movies and the history of movies. That's
yeah,
kind of like listening to an Adrian Martin, a commentary here, a
yeah,
visual essay there. People who were around the production at the time, I think, was a great asset. The late Peter Bogdanovich, I think, was one of the greatest assets we had up until his passing, because he had such direct contact
Mm,
with people that had been gone for a very long time, like an Orson Welles, a Howard Hawks, a John Ford, all of these other people and whatnot. And we still have records of that now. And I guess that is the positivity of the internet age, is you can access those records very quickly and very easily. It's one Google search away, really.
yeah,
It's the
yeah.
kind of that's I've always say this with intelligence, with knowledge, we have access to everything. It's just people's willingness to access it, and of
yeah.
course their ability to process it as well. But
Yeah,
the access
yeah.
is there now
It's
more than
it's
ever.
it's it's always available. I mean, and going back to commentaries a little bit, we can't talk about. I mean, there's a couple. I think Andrew, he's got some that he's in. One of the personal ones that I really enjoyed of yours, because it is a personal one for you, was Johnny Guitar.
Yeah.
Your Johnny Guitar, I know is a very personal film for you, and that you got to do the commentary on it. I'm sure was a great joy. And also, we can't talk about your commentary work without talking about your partner, Christina Alvarez Lopez. Does a lot of work with you. So talk about that working relationship and how that the dynamic is.
Mm. Well, I'll talk about the collaboration with Christina. My partner is that's particularly in the area of, well, we write a lot of things together, and we also make audiovisual essays, video essays.
Yeah.
And we haven't done so many of them for the DVD Blu-ray companies. We're always available to do more, let me add. And that's something, that Christina has been working on since about 2009, this form of the video essay. And just as you're saying, Andrew, that anyone can become a cinephile at any age. I mean, I had this experience that I found a new form of film criticism, of film writing in a sense, but writing in video, in images and sounds, in presenting ideas through editing, through montage, through the mixture of voice and image and music and so on. It's a very creative thing. So that introduced me to a whole new sort of creative aspect of film criticism through my contact with Christina, and through collaborating with her now for over many years. We've done hundreds and hundreds of these audiovisual essays, and often it arises simply from, we're watching a film together almost every day, and we see a film and we think, oh right, this scene. We just did one, for instance, that was about scenes of driving, where a woman wants to learn to use the gear shift, the gear stick in a car. And we saw a recent Italian TV series, The Lying Life of Adults, which this is a pattern that goes through the series, that this girl wants to drive, and she's got all these macho Italian guys who are saying, no, you can't drive, and I'll teach you to drive, baby. And, so you get all these like gender, sexual, erotic scenes around the gear shift, right? And we watched that and we thought, hey, there was a great scene in Monty Hellman's Two-Lane Blacktop, where the woman wants to learn to drive, and James Taylor teaches her, but then says, you can't do it, you can't drive. And then we remembered further back Howard Hawks' film, Red Line 7000, where James Caan, lets a woman drive his sports car on the sports track, but then gets really angry with her at the end of it, and says, get out of the driver's seat. So it's all this like gender dynamic.
Did you include the scene from Gone in 60 Seconds where Angelina Jolie and Nicolas Cage are sitting in the car and she like jumps over to the gear shift? And I'm just kidding.
Have to get in the Nicolas Cage reference.
I gotta get the Nicolas Cage reference in there.
We could have included that. There's of course there's a million things we could have included, but
sure,
we kept it just to the three so that we could keep comparing the Italian series with these older examples. So, that's the kind of a film criticism that arises from viewing, from talking, and from playing. From playing with clips and putting them in different orders. And so, that's something that Christina and I, well, we have a monthly series for a Dutch film magazine, Filmkrant, and that's online. It's a series called The Thinking Machine. So every month, this one gear shift was in the Thinking Machine series, and so so it's just a sort of it's what you said before, Stephen, that it's like daily living with cinema. It's a way of expressing that, of just having a sort of a random thought or a random connection between two films. We do a lot of things that are comparisons between different films. Sometimes same films of the same director, sometimes totally different filmmakers, different periods, different styles of cinema. But we find a sort of a way to compare, or contrast, to connect two things. So that's as I say, it's a creative form of criticism, and I've become very interested in all the forms of creative criticism. Because writing is for me creative. Writing is not an academic pursuit. For me, even when I worked in the academy, I was still trying to do creative writing. Expressive writing. Literary writing, poetic writing, personal writing. This has been a major thing for me as a writer in my life. I think of myself essentially as a writer. A writer and a film critic. That's sort of what I am. And so, yeah, the audio visual essay work is an extension of that into a new creative form. Uh, and I think it still has many possibilities. I think sometimes on the DVD and Blu-rays that we're seeing, there's sometimes a bit of a limited sort of style or format used for this. That there's a series of images and there's a sort of scripted voice on top. Which, as you say, is very related to audio commentary. It's like audio commentary with illustration sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Criterion have used that style with James Quant and all kinds of things. But sometimes you can get more creative with it. You can get more playful with the way you do it. You don't need necessarily a narrating voice. You can sort of get a point across simply through the juxtaposition of the montage of elements. That's the kind of things that Christina and I are interested in.
That's cool. Yeah, I've always been a fan of the visual essay. It's probably my favorite type of extra because the way you describe it, it really in a sense it's like a short film. It's a short film that is being created to either direct itself at a certain point of filmmaking or film or a film genre or a certain style of film. You're talking about like these gear shifts and things. That's a certain kind of small aspect of film that you're finding a through line through history and relating it to each other, and then in that can get people interested in just these other films based on this one small element. I think about what was there was a visual essay. I believe it was one that when we talked to Chris O'Neill, he did a visual essay on a film, and I can't remember what the film was, but he did a very similar thing where he tied something in and it went through all different films, and I was just like, now I want to watch all these movies.
I think it was the one he did for Ringo Lam's film. That's the one you're talking about?
It was either that one,
Burning Paradise.
It was either the Burning Paradise visual essay or it was something he hadn't released yet, but it was something he shared with us.
Okay.
But it was
with Chris. That's a great example because he is an artist. I mean, he's a filmmaker. He's an artist who has also done film criticism in written form, and now he has the chance to do video essays, and he gets a good lot of work on that. And so he brings the filmmaker's skill to it, which is precisely that it's got to have rhythm, it's got to have an expressive force, it's got to have a shape. The thing that you edit, right? And
it does. His experimental filmmaking definitely kind of showed up in that a little bit. I think So I agree. It's something that definitely still has room to expand on and actually really can surprise you with how you relay the information. When we talk back this all the time, filmmaking in general can be expressed in many different languages, not just we even to a point where when we think about movies that overuse narration, that's typically kind of a taboo thing. You're like, we don't want to hear narration through the whole movie. So hearing a narration through a whole visual essay, short sample size, but yeah, maybe there's a way we can do that, but also do it just visually, in a way and put images together that can tell a story just by looking at them. And yeah, I think that's really cool that you're experimenting with that idea with the visual essay. So I hope other companies hear this, and if you want something that's a little bit different for your film, hey, they're doing it. So that's good. That's good.
And let me add that a relatively recent one that we were very proud of is the one we did for The Music of Chance, the release of that film, where they had the critic, very fine critic A.S. Hamra doing audio commentary. And they asked Christina and I to do, roughly 10-minute audio-visual essay. And we used some narration there. But for us, it was a way of re-editing aspects of that film to explore a very particular thing, which is that there's this whole model of a town with all these miniature people in it, and trying to use that as the microcosm to see the whole film. So that's a good example if anybody wants to see the kind of work we've done for a DVD Blu-ray release. That's a good example, I think.
I did watch one visual essay you did. on a Blu-ray for the film, the Kieslowski film, No Chance,
Yeah.
or No End. I'm sorry, No End, where you did use this idea of the way they use, the characters in the film look at the camera, and they look, they're piercing through, kind of using that as a through line of some of the discussion you have in that essay. I thought was an interesting thing that you did there. So yeah, I mean, there's as we've talked about through this whole discussion, there's just many different avenues into this thing that we look, these commentaries, these visual essays, these interviews. There's different ways to do it, and that we should not get complacent. We should not get stuck in our own ways of wanting to do these things all the same way. They in themselves are art forms. Commentaries, visual essay, they're all art forms, in that we should be trying to be more, experiment and be more interesting even with these things. So,
yeah. Let me tell you a funny story about a company that I won't name that approached me at one point and said, Adrian, we'd really like you to do video essays for our releases. And I said, that's great, but I thought to myself to ask, and in your mind, what is a video essay? What is the format of a video essay? And they said, well, it's you talking into the camera. That's what they thought a video essay was my face talking into a camera, I mean, that's not a video essay, right?
I mean, I've seen some like that where there's a person talking, for whatever amount of time and talking about the movie. That's one way I've seen it, but it's not really a full visual essay. That's not my favorite version of one. I can tell you that.
It's not an audio commentary, and it's not an audio visual essay.
It's like an interview slash just a
interview introduction. Yeah.
And
I mean, that can be fine too.
Sure.
They're probably my least favorite extras, actually. Those ones that are simply a camera on somebody being interviewed. But it's another form that can give information.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting, man. Yeah, like you said, sometimes it's the people that are I mean, this isn't in any business you're talking about. The people that are in charge sometimes they're not necessarily, they've lost their passion maybe, or lost their way of wanting to do. It's become a business. Capitalism is a thing, and money is a thing that kind of rolls everything. So it kind of makes the passion, can make people lose the passion for that thing, or their willingness to experiment in that thing can kind of mess up a lot of things. Unfortunately, we don't live in a society that values art as much as we feel like it should, and so that's unfortunate. But also with your career, of course, you've written some books. Please talk about some of the books you've written. I know, in the forefront, I know you've written the Mysteries of Cinema is one book, or I know you Once Upon a Time in America, you wrote a book on that as well. So talk about your journey into writing books.
Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned before, I've written, in many, many different sort of styles and formats, from, tiny newspaper capsule reviews through to full length books. And basically, it's like with all fields of film critical work, certain doors open, certain opportunities present themselves, or one struggles to make that opportunity present itself. And so, yes, I mean, I've done a mixture of books. Some of them are short books, like Once Upon a Time in America for the British Film Institute Classics series. That's actually going to be reprinted soon.
Oh, nice.
And my book, Mysteries of Cinema, well, that's one that I spent a lot of time on putting together, because it's like what I think are my best essays from a period from the early 1980s through to recently. And sort of in-depth essays. I referred earlier to the horror film The Entity, and Peter Czachowski, the Austrian experimental filmmaker. That essay is in Mysteries of Cinema. My essays on genres that I love, teen movies, thrillers, stuff that I generally don't get asked to do audio commentaries on, because I've been stereotyped against my will as the highbrow art cinema guy. I'm okay for Buñuel and Fassbinder, but when it comes to Blake Edwards and other things that I totally love, Lubitsch and, teen movies. I've spent, so many decades studying teenage movies. And so, my essays on popular genres are in that book, Mysteries of Cinema, as well as lots on, all kinds of directors that I have really loved and admired their work, Raoul Ruiz, Philippe Garel, Godard, all of these kinds of figures, Chantal Ackerman, all of these figures that we've been mentioning over the last few hours. So I think if people want to try one hit of my work, that's really the one I recommend. Mysteries of Cinema. I think it's the one that I'm proudest of. But I'm proud of all my work. I did a book on the Mad Max movies, the first 3 Mad Max movies, that was put out by an Australian publisher, and one day I'll get a chance to stick number 4, Fury Road, and possibly
you might want to wait. They might make a few more of them.
Yeah.
I believe so. Yeah, Furiosa and other things are coming in that series. So I actually have the rights for the book back in my own control. So I'm going to expand the book.
Oh, nice.
One day.
Nice.
So that's the kind of span of things I've done. Works on popular cinema genres, works on directors such as Raoul Ruiz. I did a book with Raoul, which was done in Spanish. Several of my books are in Spanish. I didn't write them in Spanish, but they got translated for a Spanish or an Argentinian or Chilean publisher. This is the kind of thing that happened to me because of film festivals, right? It's only through going to the Valdivia Film Festival in Chile, Rotterdam that I mentioned, Buenos Aires Film Festival in Argentina. Some of these places published these books, as part of their own activities. So that's a kind of circuit that I found very congenial to my interests and to my work. And my very first book, I'll mention that too, came out in 1994. It's a book called Phantasms. It's a book of short essays on popular culture trends, films about ghosts, films about aggression, whatever was sort of coming up, in my mind as a viewer at that time, and trying to discern some of the trends, some of the fads, the obsessions within popular culture, film, TV, music, and so on. So that was my first book.
Nice. Well, Adrian, this has been fantastic. I think we had a great discussion about very different many different areas, and I think talking about film criticism and where that is and the work that we need to do to help educate people is and expand people's minds, especially young people's minds today, to help them get us back to a place where we can look at film as being more of an something that can be looked at more than just escapism is an important thing. And I think that's an important thing that should be part of any commentator or critic's goal, is to just lengthen the life of cinema. It's not, it feels like it as much history as we have, it feels so short because we're only paying attention to one small part of it, and that's the now. It feels, and it even feels like the things that are newer are getting already forgotten. In the last 10 years or 50, we're already forgetting about the last 10 years because we're already focusing on what's coming next. And that's a lot to do with the marketing machine of filmmaking. But I think that this discussion is got a lot of great points that I think people need to take with them and maybe think about it. Maybe think about picking up a book, start talking, getting a little deeper into some of the stuff you love. And but we very much appreciate you coming and talk with us. And we had a nice lengthy discussion, a little over 2 hours.
Wow. Yeah. No, well, it's been great fun for me. Great to talk to you guys and really explore some of these ideas.
All right, we appreciate the work you do, man, and hope you have a good rest of your day.
Okay, and you too as well.
Thank you.